Good morning and welcome to Live in a Greenhouse on YouTube. If you're new here, this channel is about my journey to design, build, and then live in the first greenhouse enclosed tiny home in the United States. Being the last weekend of the month, today is the June walk around. This is the time of the year when everything either takes off or tries to take over. But first, the environmental update. June marked the start of the dry season. We had rain during the first part of the month and then less than a quarter inch from a shower last night. Temperatures definitely heated up this month. Outside ranged from the mid-40s to 91 degrees. Inside the greenhouse, the temperature probe recorded a low of 50 degrees and a high of 97, but that probe is mounted just below the roof where the temperatures are hottest. At ground level, it felt more like the mid-80s. Comparing May and June, the greenhouse spent most of May between 48 and 62 degrees, with only brief periods above 90 degrees. In June, however, most hours were between 59 and 67 degrees, although there were still a few hot afternoons that pushed the temperature into the 90s near the roof. Although June wasn't especially windy, the prevailing wind comes from the west, combined with convection, which is hot air rising, and ridge lift as the wind climbs the hillside. It creates a natural airflow that helps carry the hottest air out of the greenhouse. Inside the house, it stayed comfortable even during the hottest part of the day by closing the south side curtains around midday and the west side curtains later in the afternoon. Average humidity occasionally peaked above 60% before dropping again, and after 4 years, there's still no sign of mold inside the house. As often happens, I changed my mind about what projects I wanted to work on, and as often happens, the projects took longer than expected. So come along today to see what actually got accomplished. The carport that was originally planned for this area didn't survive the budget cuts during construction. For now, that means this section remains on weed patrol duty. Until I decide what the long-term plan is, keeping it maintained is the main objective. This is year 3 for this garden, and it follows the classic sleep, creep, leap pattern that many perennial gardens go through. After a slow start and a modest second year, it's really taking off now with an explosion, which is about 10 feet. The deer repellent seemed to be helping too, because several of the bulbs have managed to survive long enough to put on a show. Although the deer did come through and trim a few last night. There are still more oxeye daisies here than I'd like, but compared to last year, it's a major improvement. It's one of those long-term battles where progress happens a little bit at a time. The plants that were already established here are putting on a nice bloom display. Unfortunately, we're far enough into the dry season now that transplanting would be risky. Filling in some of these gaps will have to wait until cooler, wetter weather returns. I'll add that to the October project list. I got sidetracked by other projects during June, so this area didn't get much attention. The cardboard is still doing its job suppressing weeds though, so the space isn't getting away from me while I focus elsewhere. I had to put this protective cage around the hydrangea because the deer kept treating it like a buffet. What's funny is they seem perfectly willing to leave the flowers growing above the cage alone. Apparently the deer and I have reached some sort of compromise. This small area between the trailer and parking was one of the few places that escaped major disturbance during construction. Because of that, it became my plant nursery and rescue area, where I temporarily saved plants while work was underway elsewhere. This is where most of June's effort went. Now that I'm looking out this window 5 days a week, screening view of the septic system and parking area has become a much higher priority. A lot of time this month was spent screening rocks out of the soil, digging deeply enough to add amendments, and creating a better environment for future plantings. The sharp rocks were relocated here to create a level, well-draining surface that keeps things out of the mud. The rounded rocks found a new home covering the soil between the rainwater tanks and the tool shed. I'm finally giving the area around the tool shed the attention it deserves. Last winter taught me that walking between the office cabin and the shed in the winter rain wasn't much fun, so this month I focused on improving both lighting and footing. I'm preparing the area for stepping stones that'll make this route easier during the wet season. Even though we had some rain this month and the tanks briefly climbed back to around 4,000 gallons, we've officially entered the dry season. The overall trend is a steady drawdown of stored water. The rock border along the greenhouse's north wall is nearly finished. Since the gabion basket won't be returning to the pool anytime soon, I moved it out of the way so it was easier to access this area to work along the greenhouse wall. Three different sunflower varieties have just started opening over the last couple of days. The tomatoes are flowering nicely, and this is the first year I've managed to get the yarrow to bloom. As for the peaches, I won't say growing peaches outdoors here is impossible, but it definitely requires finding the right microclimate. That challenge makes every peach feel a little sweeter when harvest time arrives, and that should be coming within the next few weeks. I used the last of the water in the pool to water the peach tree. Next up is cleaning the liner and finding that last leak. Longtime followers are probably laughing at that last bit of deja vu. Nasturtiums absolutely love life inside the greenhouse. The problem is they love it a little too much. They can quickly take over a bed, and when they reach peak growth, the smell can become surprisingly strong. I've been thinning them throughout June. I finally gave up on the basil and bok choy experiment in this bed and turned the space over to red potatoes. The lavage bolted unusually early this year. I enjoyed the aroma, but didn't get much opportunity to harvest it for the kitchen. And speaking of surprises, this bed produced the one and only carrot I harvested during June, a beautiful 6-inch volunteer that seeded itself from a previous planting. Meanwhile, the intentionally planted carrots here still need more time. Volunteer romaine lettuce continues producing every few days. There's also a volunteer tomato that's begun flowering. We'll have to wait and see which variety it turns out to be. I harvested 4 large artichokes this month, which is exciting because they're the first artichokes I've ever successfully grown. Several others stalled out, but getting 4 good ones is still a win. I've been enjoying peas all month long, although they're clearly approaching the end of their season. The yellow wax beans are just beginning to produce. I've been harvesting them almost nightly for dinner. At this point, it's simply too late in the season to plant this bed. I'm leaning toward converting it into a strawberry bed and then rotating in tomatoes, beans, or artichokes in future seasons. The olive tree still has lots of buds. They don't seem to be swelling much yet, but the encouraging thing is they're also not dropping. The calamandan has lots of swelling buds, so I'm cautiously optimistic about what comes next. This is the time of year when I especially appreciate having a drinking fountain inside the greenhouse. The bowl itself was a drinking fountain in my grandparents' yard when I was growing up. Back then it was supplied by a garden hose. Today it's connected to the house's potable water system, but every time I use it, it reminds me of summers at my grandparents'. When I planted borage a few years ago, I had no idea how enthusiastically it would self-seed. Last week I removed large amounts of it after flowering, but before seed production. The calendula you're seeing now are all volunteers from earlier plantings. And just like elsewhere in the greenhouse, the nasturtiums are due for another round of thinning. This hollyhock is the first one I've ever grown, and I had no idea it would reach this height, which is about 10 feet. The pothos started life as a root-bound houseplant. It's enjoying a summer vacation here in the greenhouse, and it'll head back indoors once colder weather returns. The rocks placed around the veronica seem to be working. They've discouraged the cat from scratching in this area, and the plant should produce deep purple flowers through much of the summer. The combination of sage, lavender, lemon balm, and oregano creates a wonderful fragrance throughout this section of the greenhouse. The oregano will need thinning though, or it'll eventually take over. The Caryopteris dark night is growing well and should bloom later in summer. And finally, the fern has produced a new leaf. From roughly April through September, the ridge vents remain open around the clock unless it's especially windy or raining. Because there are evergreen trees close to the north side of the greenhouse, a surprising amount of debris still finds its way inside. Closing the north side helps reduce it, but it doesn't eliminate it entirely. Normally I sweep this up immediately, but I left it here today as a reminder that even inside the greenhouse, there's always a little maintenance to be done. And there you have it, a month of small victories, a few surprises, and the usual reminders that this whole place is always evolving. Thank you for watching. I appreciate everyone who follows along and shares in both the successes and ongoing experiments. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe. And come back next time when I'll include what July's like inside the house.